It's a Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Joining us in our IPR studios, Jim McCormick in our AIM studio, Professor Emeritus of I'm getting an echo in my headphones here. Professor Emeritus at Iowa State University. He's an expert in presidential congressional relations in the area of foreign policy and many other areas. Jim McCormick, I hope you can hear me. Hope there's no echo. There's no echo for you.
No echo for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to deal with an echo. Sorry if I'm misspeaking because I have a delay in my headphones. They're working on it right now. Evan Renfro with us at the University of Northern Iowa campus where we have our Cedar Falls studio. Evan is associate professor there at UNI with expertise in international security, asymmetric warfare, the Middle East. Also important to note here is a former United States Air Force intelligence analyst. Evan, welcome back to you as well.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be with you.
Well, if you've been away from the news for even a few hours, the geopolitical landscape has shifted beneath our feet. And if you're like me, Jim and Evan, trying to keep up with the news is very difficult this morning because we've got a lot going on right now in Ankara, Turkey. In Ankara, Turkey, leaders from all 32 NATO nations trying to wrap up a summit that has suddenly turned into, I guess you could call it a high-wire act of breaking news crises. Ankara, 8 hours ahead of us here in Iowa in terms of the time, so 8 in the evening there. It was already a tense gathering over long-term defense spending and the future of Ukraine, completely, though, upended by several major developments. The real shockwave came overnight, sudden collapse of the Iran ceasefire, completely hijacking the summit's final hours. Standing alongside the NATO Secretary General, Trump told reporters he considers that the ceasefire is over. Let's listen to a little bit of the president from not long ago, speaking at length about Iran during a press conference. He commented on the series of powerful strikes exchanged between the U.S. and Iran that occurred earlier this week. Let's listen.
We said, go and do your funeral stuff. And instead of that, they start shooting rockets at ships yesterday. And so we hit them very hard last night, very hard. I would say 20-1, 20 times tougher. And I told them every time you hit, we hit. And of course, they're dirty players, so they go after everyone, probably including me. I've been number one on their list for years. And they're a bunch of scum, you want to know the truth. They're scum.
During this news conference, a reporter asked the president whether the Iran ceasefire was over. He said, as far as he's concerned, it is.
I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. I'll speak to our negotiators. They want to negotiate. They're good people. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. But they have to come back to me. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them. They're liars. We make a deal. And if I make a deal with him, we have a deal. And he goes out, he talks. We make a deal. Everyone's agreed. No nuclear weapon. We make a deal. They go outside, talk to the press. They say, we never even talked about it. There's something wrong with them. They're cuckoo.
Jim and Evan, let's focus on Iran for now. I know we have a lot to talk about that is also breaking news in the area of Ukraine, also U.S.-Turkish relationships. But if we can focus on Iran and, Evan, draw on your Middle East expertise, what's your reaction to what we've seen in the last 24 hours and heard in terms of how that reshapes our foreign policy in the Middle East? What do you find most remarkable here?
Is that for me? Or
yes, Evan, that's for you first of all, and then I'll ask Jim to piggyback on that.
So this is the sort of chaos and mess you're going to get when what's interesting here is the lack of Secretary of State Rubio. You'll notice that he's kept himself far away from this. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, a couple of real estate agents, financiers from New York, no background in the Middle East or diplomacy. Their big problem here is they have certain grand ideas and schemes of how they want to develop this. Meanwhile, though, they've decimated the State Department, career foreign service officers, and the civil service at the federal level in general, and they don't staff these things out. So the decision to hit Iran in the first place was never staffed out. It was kept to a very, very tight corduroy that didn't share any of this information. So none of this is all that surprising when it comes to this chaos, and you never know what's going to come next. Well, no one knows because nobody's planned this out.
Jim, definitely not a routine gathering for NATO. Does it, though, feel, Jim, like a real inflection point for the alliance, especially with Iran blowing up in the background?
Well, I think this efforts with regard to Iran and the kind of statement by the president, I think it's a bit overblown. I mean, I don't really think he really thinks that the MOU is ended. I think this really, frankly, is a bargaining tactic because, he also said that he was going to have his negotiators continue to meet with, I guess, the intermediaries, actually, and with Iran. So I'm not sure that despite his, rhetoric of scum and so on, is really the end of it. I think that, the domestic politics of this for the president to go back to full conflict is really bad for him. I mean, the public is still opposed to this war. We've got upcoming elections here. I don't think he can really go back to that as the statements seem to imply. I really do think that it's really to try to send a very strong message to the Iranian leadership, and whether it's the the Islamic Revolutionary Guard that are kind of carrying out this, or whether they have really been under orders to do this, or whether this is a private action that they're taking in terms of attacking some of these ships in the Straits of Hormuz. I'm not sure that it is as it's sort of been immediately portrayed as a real inflection point in terms of with regard to Iran, because I do not see how the administration can possibly go back to all-out conflict with Iran, given the domestic situation, and frankly, given the meeting that they had with their NATO partners. Are they willing to go and provide support to this? So I would put a caution sign on exactly what's going on here.
Okay, so Evan Renfro, what do you think about Jim's remarks there that it's really hard to imagine the U.S. going back to all-out war against Iran alongside Israel at this point, given also, as Jim mentioned, domestic considerations and the midterm elections coming up?
Well, the president has made it pretty clear that he doesn't care at this point about, he's not up for re-election. If the thing goes south, he said explicitly this is J.D. Vance's baby. Vance is going to be the one stuck with this hot potato. As far as the midterms, as far as the president has made his point that he's done with worrying about that, it's possible. So the problem is we have a certain amount of leverage in the military might and kinetic force that can be applied against Iran. However, Iran, as it has shown, also has an immense amount of leverage in controlling the flow of energy sources globally. Now, the player behind the scenes that's so important and is often overlooked here is China. China actually is highly dependent on that oil. No, it's not the U.S. using the oil. It affects the price of oil here because it's supply and demand. But China actually needs that oil. It's also invested heavily in clean energy. So China has no interest in seeing this go on either, but they're getting more and more influence in that region. You have to remember, while Iran can't strike militarily the U.S. soil, it can certainly, and has been doing, hit our friends and allies in the region, including places like Qatar and Oman, etc. These are key Gulf states that have been friendly with the U.S. and, to some extent, with Israel. So you risk shaking up all the geopolitics, not only in the region, but globally, when you continue down this path of trying to bomb Iran into submission. I can tell you, anyone that knows anything about Iran can tell you they're not going to just submit from that sort of force.
Mm-hmm. Jim, we have a couple minutes before the break. I mentioned that because this next question for you, because you are expert in presidential congressional relations here. President Trump reportedly called NATO a paper tiger over its response to the Iran war, even while asking those same allies to back Ukraine. How does a Congress that's supposed to have a say in foreign policy react to a president publicly disparaging the alliance while still inside of it?
Well, it's a real challenge for Congress, given, that they have not really acted in a unified fashion here. Certainly, they can they can pass resolutions and so on, and express their discontent, but they really don't have very much leverage in terms of foreign policy. I mean, they certainly, I think the bulk of the members of Congress are very supportive of the United States supporting NATO, and as recent legislation has been passed in the Congress, they have also the House passed a bill in June to give funding to Ukraine, and the Senate is considering that in terms of the National Defense Authorization Act of putting it into the actual defense budget. So I mean, those are some levers, but those are not immediate levers that they can use in terms of stopping presidential action, because that, of course, needs both houses to approve and then the president to sign on. National Defense Authorization Act is one way to do that, because that's got the defense budget in, and President Trump is unlikely to be wanting to veto that kind of legislation.
Jim,
it's long-term. It's long-term legislation.
We'll be back with our foreign policy dynamic duo, you have to say. Jim McCormick of Iowa State University, Evan Renfro of the University of Northern Iowa. Join us, 1-866-780-9100, as we cover the breaking news from the end of the NATO summit, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. Back with more of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Jim McCormick with us, and Evan Renfro. Jim of ISU and Evan of the University of Northern Iowa both have their wheelhouses in the areas of foreign policy, and coming in real handy this morning as we look at what's happening at the closing of the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, 8 hours ahead of us. And we're picking up a number of things here. If you have a question for Jim and Evan, join us, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. And we're all trying to keep up with the breaking news out of Turkey and otherwise the Middle East. But let's talk about this. Trump reopening the Greenland fight at this same summit. Jim, I'll go to you on this, but let's listen to the president here. Greenland's head of government, Jens Frederik Nielsen, posted on Facebook that the island is not for sale. This after President Trump renewed his demand to control the territory during today's NATO press conference. Nielsen wrote, "Repeated calls for the takeover or control of our country do not change this." Let's hear the Trump remarks that he's reacting to.
Greenland is very important for the United States, but it's not important for Denmark. In fact, when Denmark was overrun by the Nazis in less than one day, Hitler beat them out in one day, took over. They asked us to take care of Greenland. In fact, we took Greenland, and then stupidly we gave it back. We shouldn't have given it back to them, because we're the ones that need it. We need it for protection of the world, not just the United States. And
Jim, your thoughts on the reemergence of the Greenland fight?
I mean, this is really quite surprising. I mean, to sort of throw this issue into the NATO summit. I thought it was sort of a dead letter. There's apparently been negotiations continuing going on between Greenland and the United States. I suppose the most benign way to say that, that bringing this up again, of course, is to sort of nudge NATO in terms of the high north, that they also have security interests in protecting the high north. But Denmark has actually taken some additional action already with regard to Greenland here to bolster the kind of defense. And the United States has, they've given the United States access in terms of bases and so on. So I'm not sure, except to highlight the importance of the high north and the whole Arctic region is part of NATO. But in terms of having any substantive impact, I mean, the American public continue, much like in terms of the Iran war, the American public is really not keen about supporting the taking over of Greenland. So I think it's more of a message to the NATO partners to take action with regard to the Arctic.
Evan Renfro, with the Middle East as your specific area of focus, let me ask about what's been happening in regards to relations with our NATO partner, Turkey. It seems a massive diplomatic pivot from the president, using the meeting with the Turkish president to announce he's lifting U.S. sanctions on Turkey, even signaling he's open to sell our most advanced F-35 fighter jets, reversing years of fierce American resistance. Evan, you've taught strategy at the Naval War College. And from a security standpoint, what does it mean, in your view, that the president is lifting sanctions on Turkey, dangling these F-35 sales at the very moment that Turkey's neighborhood, including Iran, is destabilizing again?
Well, it shows the importance of Turkey geostrategically. It's of course always been that land bridge between Europe and Asia. The problem with the F-35s specifically is it really infuriates Greece, who's also a NATO ally. Turkey is our only NATO ally in the region of the Middle East. But Turkey and Greece have beef going way back, mainly over Cyprus. But we have a key Air Force base, Incirlik, in Turkey. And as Spain has shown, when we have bases overseas like that, is through government-to-government agreements. And part of these agreements means that we can only use those bases with their permission. So while we have all these troops and planes in Turkey, Erdogan could always say, well, you can't fly today. You can't use this base to conduct operations in Iran. This is what Spain did, which got President Trump's ire up on that. So he also, I think, President Trump likes Erdogan. Erdogan likes Putin. Erdogan considers himself sort of a mini Putin insofar as his authoritarian instincts go in dealing with the press and academia and the general populace. So I think this is all part and parcel with part of its personality, and part of it is this idea we need to sort of give some carrots, if you will, to Turkey to ensure their cooperation with what the U.S. is attempting to do vis-a-vis Iran.
Mm-hmm. Jim, do you agree with that reasoning behind what seems to be a massive diplomatic pivot from the president?
Yes, I do, very much so. I mean, there is a congressional restriction on this, of course, because Turkey had purchased the Russian air defense, the S-400, and actually there's congressional legislation that was passed back in about 2019, to be precise, that put restrictions on selling to Turkey, the F-35s. It was written into I mentioned that National Defense Authorization Act. It was written into the 2019 Defense Authorization Act. So technically, the administration will have to somehow either get that rescinded or to work around that. The earlier administration, or at least by earlier legislation, there had been restrictions placed upon by the Trump administration via some legislation that the Congress had passed back in 2017 that Russia sold military hardware to someone that U.S. could impose sanctions on that, and so Turkey is under both of those restrictions. Now the latter, the president could unilaterally, because he can control the lifting or imposing of sanctions. but the legislation is problematic. So I don't think it's a slam dunk in terms of selling. I mean, they're talking about 100 F-35s, that would be part of this potential sale or transfer to Turkey here. So I think that's problematic. The Congress could weigh in, but given what has happened, I mean, they can review an arms sale, but they would have to have a veto-proof support within both houses to really overturn any kind of sale.
Jim McCormick with us of Iowa State University, Evan Renfro of the University of Northern Iowa, as we pick apart the different spokes of fast-moving stories, all connected in some way to the closing of the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey today. Join us, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. Jim, back to you on this, because both, let's address the Ukraine war spoke of this story. Ukrainian President Zelensky meeting Trump today, pushing for Patriot batteries. Ukraine says it desperately needs, I think I heard in the top of the hour NPR News, the president willing to let them produce their Patriot missiles for themselves. We should mention Kyiv could not intercept a single one of about 30 Russian ballistic missiles in this week's attack because supplies are so low. And we have the Iran ceasefire collapsing in the same news cycle. So here we differentiate between the drones and these ballistic missiles, which fly very high, come down very quickly. So they're a much different weapon to counter. Jim, what do you make of the, at least for now, good terms that seem to exist between President Zelensky and Trump?
That was what was surprising to me as I watched the news conference, I guess, that they had, although mostly it was a soliloquy by President Trump. But, that he was so supportive of Zelensky in terms of giving them licensing. And he said even Raytheon, who is the manufacturer of these Patriot missiles, didn't even know about this, that he was going to license them and that they could produce them. So I was quite surprised because, the president has been very cautious about providing direct aid to Ukraine. He's asking, he sold the weapons to the Europeans and the Europeans would transfer them. So I think that has been a bit of a surprise to me, the kind of strength of support that President Trump gave to Zelensky here. But Zelensky a couple days earlier, gave this speech, I think it was to the European Union, in which he said, these supersonic missiles that the Russians are attacking Kyiv and, killing lots of people most recently, they really don't have very much protection against them. So there is this kind of a commitment, even by the Europeans, I noticed, coming out of this conference to provide defense systems to Ukraine here. So this has been, I think, very successful effort for Zelensky and for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Pivoting back to the Middle East here with you, Evan, you've spent a career studying asymmetric warfare and counterterrorism. Does Iran striking U.S. partners in Kuwait, Bahrain, rather than U.S. forces directly, does that look to you like a calculated escalation, or the Iranian regime lashing out without a clear strategy?
Well, no, I think they definitely have a strategy here, and that's to divide and conquer. If they can demoralize our Gulf state partners, that would be militarily the extent. Again, they can't really reach out and touch the U.S., but they can certainly hold at risk our friends in the region, of course, any U.S. troops as well stationed there. When you go and you sort of demoralize these Gulf states, you make it to where they're going to be more hesitant to cooperate with the U.S. / Israel, and maybe be more responsive to China's interests / Iran's interests. So again, this is a way to drive a wedge between the Gulf states and the U.S. objectives.
Mm-hmm. And also the context here is Khomeini's successor still hasn't appeared publicly. Khomeini killed in that first day of fighting. Now we have this new round of fighting. What does a leadership vacuum like this usually mean for how a regime behaves under pressure? Does it match up with what was expected? More caution, more recklessness?
Yeah, so this would have been expected had it been staffed out to the U.S. intelligence community. Instead, they took the Israeli intelligence community's analysis, and Israeli intelligence is extremely good. Mossad is very effective at locating and eliminating adversaries. However, the problem with doing that is their agents are dealing with people who hate the regime. And so the feedback or the intelligence that they collect is going to indicate things like, oh, if you take out the supreme leader, the people will rise up, etc. This is what they briefed to President Trump. Unfortunately, that's not how these things work. As if you look at when Saddam Hussein was toppled, or if you take out any sort of leader of an organized criminal group, whether that be the mafia or narcotics cartel, what happens when you do a leadership decapitation strike is not that you bring down the entity that you're striking. It's that you create a vacuum that's then filled with various radical elements fighting for that top job. Khomeini's son, you're not going to see him in public because if he stuck his head out, it'd be blown off. He'll be in hiding. It'll be very difficult to find. It took 10 years to locate bin Laden, the most wanted man in the world. So these sorts of strikes are not a good idea. And when you base your intelligence off of people that are very biased towards a particular worldview, then that's a mistake. And the reason we have these long, complicated staff-out processes, and they are long and complicated and often boring and tedious, but they're designed so you don't do these sorts of strategic blunders, the likes of which this is a major one. Not since the invasion of Iraq have we seen something so at odds with U.S. national security interests.
Mm-hmm. We have a few minutes before we go to break here. I wanted to get your views on where you see this heading, what you'll be watching. Jim, we have this collapsing ceasefire arriving the same week as a funeral filled with kill Trump imagery. What do you see in the future? Does this change our domestic political stakes for the president or just harden the views people already hold?
Yeah, I think it really just hardens the kind of view that Americans have with regard to this war, and I think it also hardens the position of the administration here. I guess what I would look for is that there would be some break in kind of the discussions that are going on between the Americans and the Iranians, with the Qatar or what have you. And that would make kind of produce a kind of a break point in the kind of situation that we've really over the last, I guess, 48 hours have had to contend with. So that's what I would be looking for. I don't think that, frankly, either side, the funeral is going to be completed tomorrow with the burial in Iran. And so after that, I think maybe things will start to turn in a slightly different direction here by the Islamic leadership.
Mm-hmm. Evan, as a Middle East expert, what are you watching first and foremost?
Well, I want to see actually what happens, because you can't go by public stream of consciousness versions that can change minute to minute, much day to day. I think President Trump is frustrated with Iran because he says, look, they say one thing to my envoys, Witkoff and Kushner, but then they go and say something else publicly. Yes, that's how it works when you're dealing with leadership in the Middle East. It's what they tell you privately is not what they're going to say publicly, which is the opposite of how U.S. policymakers think, because you had that view in D.C., what you say in the back room is what really matters, then you go do a presser. It's the reverse of that in the Middle East.
Okay. Politics Day will continue here on River to River with Evan Renfro and Jim McCormick. We'd love to have you join our conversation. Let's dive into some domestic politics. The Graham Plattner collapse in Maine we want to tackle. The fight for Senate control. Of course, we have an open Senate seat race here in Iowa. We'll get Jim's thoughts on that when we return. Also thoughts on the 250th anniversary of our country and the celebrations that took place this past weekend. Perhaps you were part of them and have a question. 1-866-780-9100, River to River at iowapublicradio.org. Back in a moment. Back with more of this Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer with Evan Renfro of the University of Northern Iowa, Jim McCormick of Iowa State University, and devoting most of the hour, if you've been with us, to what's been happening in the foreign policy arena. But let's tackle this. Jim, I'd like your thoughts on the Maine Democratic Senate nominee Graham Plattner's campaign, still in free fall. It's gotten worse overnight. A woman told Politico that Graham Plattner sexually assaulted her, raped her in 2021. Allegations he denies as categorically false. And a second detail since emerging, the accuser alleging he removed a condom without consent. Plattner, as of my information, has not withdrawn yet, but pressure mounting fast. Bernie Sanders, this is one of his most prominent backers, now joining Schumer, Gillibrand, Warren, Ruben Gallego, Ro Khanna in calling for him to step aside. The Maine Democratic Party has gone a step further, saying Plattner will have no role in choosing his own replacement. Behind the scenes maneuvering to replace him has already begun. There's a deadline. I think it's Monday, Jim. What are your thoughts on this implosion and what it means for the Democrats in Maine and for control of the Senate, of course?
Well, yeah, the last point, of course, is crucial because they had really focused. The Democrats had really focused on Maine as one of their possible pickups. You know, they need to pick up four Senate seats, and Plattner won the primary rather handily here. You know, and the governor Janet Mills, who had been a candidate, withdrew because of lack of finances here. So I think it really is a problem. I liked your last statement here. The Democratic Party in Maine said that he will have no hand in picking his successor, because I was wondering why I don't think he has very many options except to withdraw. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if he was trying to use the decision to withdraw or not as leverage to appoint his possible successor here. But the Maine Democratic Party now has said that he's not going to be in a position to do that. I don't think, given, as you read out the litany of people who have called for his resignation, from this seat, how he can possibly stay on. I thought maybe he was using it as possible leverage to get his successor. I mean, one person has already filed, I think it's Troy Jackson, who is actually close to Plattner, as I understand it. And I'm not sure that that's going to be the favorite of the Maine Democratic Party or of Senator Schumer here. I suspect that Senator Schumer and the Democratic Senatorial Committee, Senator Gillibrand, are going to have a considerable say in the kind of nominee that they put as a replacement here. And that has to be done by, I'm just looking at the dates, by July 27th. Mm. So there's a short window here to get this done. I do think my own view is that any candidate that comes on now is at a considerable disadvantage in terms of, the campaign, because the shadow of Plattner is going to always be in the background as they initiate their campaign.
Right, and one can't help but think of somewhat of a parallel between this and the late exit of Joe Biden in the last presidential race, Jim.
Absolutely. I mean, it almost, the timing is almost the same. Actually, it was in July, as you might remember, and there's really relatively short 4 months or 3.5 months, maybe by the time this is all completed, that this new candidate would have in terms of establishing him or herself as the principal adversary to Susan Collins. I mean, some are saying that, well, Susan Collins is vulnerable. Certainly she is. But at the same time, if you think back to 2020, how successful she was, even though she was behind in the polls almost continuously until the final vote count.
Yep.
And then she won with 51% of the vote. So, it was, I think it would be a real challenge for a substitute candidate in the main Senate race.
Jim, quickly, before we go back to our phones, if Democrats can't flip Maine, I don't know how tuned in you are to the math here in the Senate. Does that effectively end the Democrats' realistic path to a Senate majority? We know Iowa is in there as a possible flip. I don't think it's a likely flip, but if you show a half a dozen states with the Senate races.
I'm just looking at some of the states. I mean, certainly North Carolina is probably the biggest prize that the Democrats are going to have, in which Roy Cooper is way ahead, or at least have a substantial lead in the polls. But you look at all of these other states, Ohio, which is another one which was not really on the map before, the margin there is about 2 percentage points. In Iowa, the latest poll, depending on which poll you look at, it's a 4% or a 3% race. Alaska, which is surprising to me because, they have rank order system in Alaska. The latest poll shows they're only about a 2% margin, and that's been a traditionally very strong Republican state. The one danger, I suppose, for Democrats, of course, is Michigan, which is now they're having an issue in terms of selecting a candidate there. So there are a number of states. I guess the shorter answer is there are still a number of states in play. And I was surprised at looking at reviewing some of the polling. Obviously, it's polling. It's one shot. It's still early, 3.5 months out or 4 months out. But races are all very, very close. And I think there's a strong, just to be clear about this, there's going to be a strong anti-Trump vote, and it's going to bring out Democrats here. And so that is probably the lifeline that they hold, even if Maine becomes problematic for the Democrats.
Jim McCormick and Evan Renfro, let's go to our phones. Conroy joining us from Des Moines. Thanks for waiting. Conroy, you wanted to hearken back to our earlier discussion of the Middle East and Iran. Welcome.
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment regarding Trump's rhetoric and his use of words against other leaders like Iranian leaders. And instead of trying to, work on a peaceful resolution, he claimed they violated the ceasefire by firing on ships. One way or another, okay. So why are you escalating the situation and cutting off their line of revenue and then threatening, that's not resolution, that's escalation.
Okay.
So you cannot have an approach with Israel who wants to control the Middle East, and
all right,
way to go.
Conroy, a little difficulty understanding you, even with my headphones on. Evan, I toss it to you. I don't know what you got from Conroy there. I think he wants to talk about the president's rhetoric and tactics here.
It's what I could gather what the question was, if it was a question, why is the president using such negative rhetoric towards Iran? This is the way the president talks about anybody he doesn't like. He's known for pretty rough language against opponents, foreign and domestic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's spend the last few minutes on, how our country marked the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, the past weekend. Iowa, we should remind ourselves, played an outsized role in the year-long celebration we're in the midst of. President Trump actually kicked off Freedom 250 at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. Remember that? Back in July of 2025, But the Washington, D.C. finale turned out to be far more contested than a typical Independence Day. Trump created this Freedom 250, a White House-backed operation, even though Congress had already established a separate, nonpartisan America 250. That was its name, commission, a decade earlier to lead the planning. House Democrats published a 55-page report accusing the president of bending the celebration toward his own political interests. The centerpiece, of course, the Great American State Fair on the National Mall, drawing, persistently sparse crowds. Several musical acts dropped out over concerns the event had become too politically charged. Jim, walk me through your thoughts. What actually made this 250th anniversary different? We had the sparse crowds, the fenced-off reflecting pool, algae there, the disputed attendance numbers, a Trump speech that spent most of his time on his own record. Is this how a presidential spectacle works now, or is something genuinely unusual about celebrating national unity this way?
Yeah, I think it was a very sort of atypical 4th of July kind of celebration, particularly at the 250. It was certainly marked in part by patriotism, but also by a great deal of partisanship. I did not see the speech that President gave at Mount Rushmore, but I did read it. And what was really striking to me is the first part of the speech was he took really an attack upon, those who would contest American culture and would threaten American culture, even as he went on to cite many of the historical traditions of the United States. So it was very partisan in that sense. And the same on the National Mall. He actually talked about his speech there. The communist threat and so on. That, in my recollection, that is not sort of the typical 4th of July kind of celebration, and so it was sort of atypical in that sense. I think it was atypical in yet another sense that I'll just add, and that there was just gigantic fireworks display afterwards. I mean, I didn't see all of it, but I did see some of it. So it was really a mixture of some patriotism. As his Mount Rushmore speech, he went through all of the history of the various presidents who are there, plus also some current officials and individuals who have contributed. And of course, in the National Mall, he cited all of the military accomplishments of the United States here, demonstrating the American prowess that way. So it was not something that you usually go to a 4th of July parade and there's a just a certain number of exhibits and floats and so on and touching on the American traditions and so on, but not really getting into the kind of partisanship that we saw displayed.
Jim, you and Evan and I, all three of us have in our living memory the 200th, the bicentennial of our country. When Gerald Ford was president, he wrote that the bicentennial then was a moment when, quote, the nation's wounds had healed after Vietnam and Watergate. I remember in 1976 as a 12-year-old in Cedar Falls, and I think at this time of year probably sporting quite a significant sunburn, or at least suntan, and dreading to go back into the fields to detassel corn. Just as an aside there, Evan, is that kind of unifying moment even achievable in this political environment? I don't know if I'm recalling with my 12-year-old brain what 1976 was like. Was it already more myth than reality?
Well, Ben, I'm afraid you're aging me. That was slightly before my time. I was one of the few good things to come out of the Carter administration.
All right, very good. Sorry about that.
But
it's your wisdom. It's your wisdom that threw me off there.
Yeah, indeed. But I will say that while I agree this is atypical in a long-term sense, like Jim was discussing. I do think it is very typical of the current President Trump, who tends to make these sorts of celebrations into more pep rallies for himself. So to me, that's par for the course on what you get with this administration.
Yeah. A PBS News NPR Marist poll finding 47% of Americans think the country has moved far away from its founding ideals. 82% believe democracy faces a serious threat. Jim, that's a striking backdrop for a birthday party, isn't it? I wonder if you connect those attitudes with the muted public response to these festivities.
Yeah, I really do. And I actually wanted to make mention of that Gallup put out a poll on asking about American pride, just a few days before the 4th of July celebration. And, of course, what's stunning of that, and I'll make 2 points on this, is that the number of people that feel extremely proud of being Americans, or even moderately very proud of being Americans, has kind of declined. It's just slightly over 50% with both of those responses here. And those that are extremely proud is down to 33%. Why that's consequential, and, of course, with the 250th anniversary, I've been reading a lot about Alexis de Tocqueville and his visit to the United States and his writing of Democracy in America. And what he said was, what he was struck by was the social cohesion in the United States that made for democracy to work. And as I was reading these poll results from Gallup, it struck me that de Tocqueville would be very unhappy, that the American social cohesion has so much declined. Because if you go deeper in this survey as well, the partisan difference, and I'm not going to surprise anybody when I say this, in terms of the pride that the public has, is really divided along partisan lines here, rather starkly on partisan lines. So, what's troubling about this anniversary and about this kind of poll result is that the social cohesion has really at least taken a knock, it seems to me, in recent, and they talk about over time. It's not just it's not a 1-year deal, but it's been over time that there's been an erosion of this kind of social cohesion among the American public, and that struck me as a impact of this 4th of July event.
All right, Jim McCormick, Professor Emeritus of Iowa State University, who was not alive during the era of Alexis de Tocqueville, by the way, in case you were wondering.
Pretty close.
Had to throw that in there. Evan Renfro of UNI, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be with you.
Okay, today's show produced by...
Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome. Samantha McIntosh, technical support from Sean McLean, Tony Daner, and Natalie Dunlop. I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.